Resolution Working Group. Francois, over to you.
Many thanks, Ayana. I am François Tempé, as Ayana said, Vice Chair of the Resolution Working Group. Many thanks to all of you for attending this meeting. The Chair, Alex, presents his apology for not attending, but some stormy weather on the eastern region of the US had adverse effects of internet connection, road traffic, etc. So that's why Alex could not attend this virtual meeting. Many thanks also for the Secretariat for their indefatigable support. Hayana has just provided you with the logistical and practical details. So I think we can go into the heart of the subject as of now and start with slide 2. So this slide 2 reminds us of the context and history of the paper. The second bullet point tells us that this is developed as a follow-up of a previous issues paper that was published 10 years ago in light of subsequent developments and also in light of future developments that are expected on PPS. As some of you may be aware of, there is some discussion within the EU about establishing PPS in this region of the world, but not only in the EU. A number of sub-Saharan Africans are also considering the issue. So this was, among others, one of the reasons for the EIS to find it opportune to update and refresh these issues. Public consultation took place for 60 days. That's the usual IIS procedure for those of you that are familiar with IIS public consultation. Then the last bullet point retraces the comments that were received on the draft paper, and that's also the opportunity to thank all the stakeholders who commented the paper. Indeed, the IIS is quite intent of receiving feedback that enriches the paper. We can go to slide 3. So as I have just mentioned, the paper aims to be an updated overview of global practices regarding policyholder protection schemes, their roles in insurance resolution and related activities. As I have also just mentioned, in the context where a number of jurisdictions are considering establishing PPS, then this paper should serve as inspiration, as a guide for such projects. And then the last bullet point is also important. The paper is not meant to set new standards related to PPS. As you probably know, in current ICPs, there is no standard about policyholder protection scheme. And you also probably know that in a number of countries in the world, there are simply no PPS or there are some PPS, but that only cover part of the business. So we have probably not reached a stage where we can envisage a global standard on PPS. So that's definitely the delineation of the aim of the paper. We can go to next slide. So this is just a replication of the summary of the issues paper. Next slide, please. So section 1 defines the general objective of a PPS and offer advice about reading the paper, including an explanation of some related terms. You know, through all over the planet, we do not always use the same phrases or acronyms to speak of sometimes very similar things. Some regions use rather the phrase insurance guarantee scheme, but in reality it means the same as PPS, policyholder protection scheme. So this is explained in section 1. Section 1 also mentions that the paper was built upon a survey among IAS members. That's why it also aims at being some of replication of or gathering of current practices. The last sub-bullet point is important. The PPS are generally a mechanism of last resort, which means that they only intervene where all other attempts have failed. And this will be linked to what we will see in the next slide. So these are next slide or section 2 of the issues paper describes the roles of PPS in recovery and resolution. So typically PPS intervene in a phase of insolvency and resolution. That's what is mentioned in the last bullet point. In a few jurisdictions, however, PPS are also used in recovery, and the paper, that's definitely not the majority among IAS members, but it had to be mentioned as it happens in some countries. So how do PPS intervene? In fact, there is a variety of ways for PPS to meet commitments of a failing insurer towards its policyholder. They can pay policyholders' claim either as a lump sum or by continuing the performance of the insurance contract, or they can cover a shortfall in capital or liquidity to add a compulsory transfer of bail-in. These are the kind of situations that are incidentally described at length in the guidance under ICP 12, where the resolution authority tries to transfer the portfolio to an accepting insurer, but there is a shortfall in capital. So what can you do in such cases? And these are the kind of situation where a PPS can help. Let's go to next slide. So coverage. Section 3 of the paper discusses issues of coverage, including considerations relevant to the determination of scope, limits, and other design features of a PPS. as well as issues relating to cross-border cooperation and coverage. The PPS cover can vary, notably in terms of amount, eligible policies, eligible policyholders, and geographical scopes. Quite often, eligible policies are defined with reference to lines of business, but not always. Sometimes they are defined with as mandatory insurance, for instance, and those do not always coincide with lines of business. So calibration of the intervention of the PPS is also important. And then the last issue that was discussed was the case of cross-border failure. It is a question that was especially but not exclusively relevant to the United States and to the EU, where you have a single market but several jurisdictions. At the same time, the relevance of the discussion that you have in the paper is not limited to these two regions of the world, as some other countries, especially if they have small market, may in the future consider to have a common PPS covering several jurisdictions, or at least a PPS that covers insurers with cross-border activities. So this will be this is discussed at length in the paper. You will see that the US and the European Union have quite different ways of dealing with this, and this is also explainable by different in history, different degrees in supervisory convergence, but it was nonetheless quite easy to reach a full agreement in the drafting of the paper. Next slide, please. So funding, the funding issue is also relevant. It is important that the PPS should have adequate and readily available funds. And then you have several ways to fund a PPS. First, collecting contributions from insurers or applying a surcharge to policyholders. And then you have the timing of the funding. Should you have funding before a failing takes place, after a failure takes place, or partly before and partly after an insurer's failure? This is discussed in the paper. There are pros and cons on each options. Of course, if you have an ex-ante funding, you are more confident than that the PPS will help policyholders, but at the same time, this will be more costly to the industry. If, on the other hand, you provide that funding takes place only after an insurer's failure, then when you are trying to establish a PPS, it often makes the pill more palatable to the industry, because it's in the end it's the industry that funds the PPS, but by so doing you incur the risk of not having enough funds, at least to start the compensation. So perhaps the best option is the combination of the two, but that's indeed for each jurisdiction to decide, and it is explained again and discussed in the issues paper. Next slide, please. Disclosure and communication. It is important that the public is made aware of the existence of the PPS, if any, of course, but also of their limit in coverage, in amounts, etc., and also with some caveats. So, of course, you do not have everything in those slides. Another caveat that is mentioned in the paper and that is also relevant is that it is important that the existence of a PPS is not used as a marketing tool to sell insurance product, because this could lessen the vigilance of the policyholder. So the communication should be proportionate to the risk it seeks to manage and explain who is eligible and the extent of cover. And it is important that it build credibility with key stakeholders, which are insurers, policyholders, and intermediary. And to build this credibility, a variety of channels should be used. Next slide, please. Cooperation and coordination. So it is essential, whether it's business as usual or in a crisis situation. This is especially so when between PPSs that apply to the same insurer. This is a situation that you could have, for instance, when you have a composite insurer from the one end and a life or non-life PPS on the other hand. But you may have a variety of cases where you have several PPSs that can intervene when an insurer is failing. And then, as importantly, coordination should take place between PPSs and other authorities, such as supervisors and resolution authority. To help this communication and cooperation in normal situation as well as in crisis situation, you can envisage a formal mechanism to facilitate such exchanges, such as MOU. This is also further detailed in the issues paper. Next slide, please. Then section 7 is a sort of appendix to the paper. They describe some other policyholder protection mechanisms which per se are not PPSs, but they are mentioned for the records, such as preferred claims, tied assets, and segregated assets. So I think that we have exhausted almost the paper and anyway the slide deck, and I think that we are ready for the questions.
Thank you, Francois. If anyone would like to ask questions, please raise your hand or put them in the chat box.
There doesn't seem to be any question yet. This is probably the indication that the slide deck and its presentation by the presenter was crystal clear, and maybe also that the paper that was published 1 month ago is also so clear that no question of any sort arises.
Excuse me, Francois. I think we have a question from Alistair Campbell.
And a comment, Francois, if you can hear me. First of all, congratulations to you and the whole working group for the accomplishment. I was reviewing all of the stakeholder feedback and commentary that you received, and I think it is very clear that IAS had a challenging job to incorporate all of the diverse feedback, and I think did so very capably. So congratulations on the accomplishment. My question is about how IAIS is thinking about policyholder protection schemes in the context of its increasing customer focus orientation. A core element of the PPS function, obviously, is about managing and supporting recovery and resolution in the interests of the system. But there is a core element of what a IGS PPS offers, which is genuinely consumer protection. And so to the extent that IAIS is thinking more and more about consumer focus, is a likely next step to do a deeper dive into the ways that an IGS or PPS really should become a recommended component of financial services safety net in each IAIS jurisdiction? Question.
Yes, thank you, Alistair. And I will also leave it to the Secretariat to complement my answer. What I can say at this current stage is that, well, as you know, IAS works very much on consensus, and so far, beyond countries that do not have any PPS, you also have many countries where you do have PPS, but that only cover a part of the insurance business in the country. For instance, mandatory insurance is a quite frequent example, but even in France, for instance, all sorts of mandatory insurance are not covered by a PPS. So the IS certainly takes your question on board, but given the diversity of the situation over the planet, I would not expect immediate new standards, that is new mandatory material on establishing PPS. But I will give the floor to the Secretariat if they want to further comment this.
Thank you, Alistair, and also hi to everyone. This is Hanna van Voorde from the Secretariat. So I have nothing in a sense to add to what Francois has just mentioned. So at the moment, there's no plan within the IAS to develop really standards on PPS, but the issues paper is a proof that the fact that we've updated it, and is a proof that we do see this as an important tool within the toolkit of supervisors. But there are jurisdictional differences in how they approach the liquidation and resolution of insurers, and PPS is one important tool, but it's not a tool that's used by all jurisdictions at the moment. There's no plan for us to develop really a requirement or a standard on its existence in each and every jurisdictions. But we will, of course, continuing also monitoring what is happening amongst our membership, and if the need arises to do more on the topic, we will definitely do so in the future, also in collaboration with stakeholders like yourself. And Francois, there are two more comments in the chat function. I don't know if you can see them or if we should read them for you.
Yes, I'm just reading one. Could you granulate the definition of PPS? Does it require to implement any legislative measure? well, I will first answer the second part of the question. Does it require to implement any legislative measure? I would say that's up to each jurisdiction, but I would suppose that in most jurisdictions, PPS indeed needs to be established by the law and probably by primary legislation. When it comes to granulating the definition of PPS, I'm not sure I fully understand the question, but perhaps you will find more details in the issues paper itself. In fact, a PPS, a policyholder protection scheme, of course, if you only consider these three words, you may find it a bit opaque, but in fact, it is a body, an entity generally funded by the insurance industry, and the aim of a PPS is just to compensate policyholders to, between brackets, step in the shoes of the failing insurer. So let me take the sentence back again. The aim of the role of a PPS is to compensate policyholders when a failed insurer cannot do so. And what also generally happens in not all but many jurisdictions is that the PPS do not either fully compensate all policyholders, or sometimes they just do not compensate some lines of business and only compensate some other lines of business. I don't know whether I am clarifying appropriately your question, but at least at this stage, that's an answer I could provide. And then we have another question. Will the IAS be considering how to wind up an existing PPS when it is no longer appropriate for the market it was set up to protect? So far, the issues paper does not consider this question, but this is a fair point in the sense that the PPSs are funded by the industry. So in the event where they would no longer be necessary, it is important that the funding gets back to the industry. That's also why transparency requirements are important. Now, this does not seem to be a very frequent or a very likely situation in the survey that the IAS has conducted, and as well as in the consultation phase, there was no asking of considering this situation. But of course, if it, in the event where it happened, the funds should be appropriately repaid to those who funded the PPS. Any other question?
Thank you, Francois and Hannah. I think Angus Cozy is raising hand.
Hello, Francois and team. I don't actually have a question, but I'm Angus Scorgi and I represent Insurance Europe, and we just wanted to say thank you for taking our comments on board. We noted you made quite a few changes to your issues paper from the draft based on the input that we provided from Europe. So it was just to say thanks again for your efforts there and for taking the time to consider our comments and include the changes. So thank you very much.
You're welcome. Any other questions? Well, in the event there are no questions, maybe a last chance, but there doesn't seem to be that there are new questions. So thanking again all those who contributed to this issues paper through their comment in the consultation phase. Thanking again the Secretariat for all their support, with thanking again and renewing the apologies from Alex, our chair. I would propose that we close this meeting, and it's always a pleasure to discuss with the whole planet about these relevant issues. Many thanks.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye-bye.